Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here. Wanted to give you a quick, let's say, disclaimer or heads up just about this week's bonus podcast. We're fortunate enough to be joined by a gentleman by the name of Steve Wright, who specializes in helping people overcome digestive issues and gut issues. And when we talk to Steve, we're talking more about what comes out of the body rather than what goes into the body. So I just wanted to give you that quick disclaimer because you're going to hear some words which you may not use all the time and certainly wouldn't use around the dinner table, but is certainly a very important health issue. So just wanted to give you the heads up so you're not taken by surprise when you listen to this week's bonus podcast, which is very, very helpful and a very, very important issue. So I hope you do tune in and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here. So happy to be bringing you another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast, and very excited about this week because we have a awesome guest by the name of Steve Wright. And the reason I'm excited to have Steve here on the show, Steve is the co-founder of a website called scdlifestyle.com. And what is so brilliant about Steve and his program and even his story, which I'm very excited to hear him share with you, is it's all about digestive health. And full transparency, as anyone who listens to this show or who's read my book knows, I am not a digestive health expert. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to bring in someone who's got some complementary information for us to get educated and to help our digestion. So Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad we got to connect like this.
Well, Steve, let's just get started with your story, and I feel free to make it. I don't want to turn this into an Oprah show necessarily, but I know there's some emotional challenges with poor digestive health, and that can be really a struggle. And tell us about your story and also the stories that inspired you to do what you're doing today.
Yeah, we could do. The Oprah show might be able to book me for about 8 hours probably on that question alone. But I'll keep it as quick as I can because we do have over 300 articles on our blog at scdlifestyle.com, including several pages of my full story, like the gory details. So the simple story for me was that I was a typical American kid, athletic, went to college in that time period. I didn't eat out a ton. My family did cook meals at home a lot. However, I did a lot of things like take antibiotics, and then I went to college and I got my degree in electrical engineering from a very stressful program where we took a lot of 20 credit hour terms. At the whole time, I tried to play sports and tried to party. And so I had all these things going on that just were like a myriad of factors that are going to be not healthy. And what began to happen is that I had a lot of IBS issues. So I had a lot of alternating constipation and diarrhea, a lot of farting and bloating. And during college, everyone just kind of talked about this as normal, like that's what happened after you partied, you had some digestive issues, and it was just kind of like what you went through at that time period. So I didn't think of myself as abnormal. I just thought it was something I had to deal with. And after college, I was overweight. I was 240. I'm 180 now, so I was 60 pounds overweight. And I was like, wow, I've kind of like wrecked myself a little bit here. I need to get my health under control. And I've always been into weightlifting and bodybuilding and sports and that kind of thing. So I really just poured my heart into sort of losing weight and getting back into shape and looking good and that kind of thing. And as I was getting slimmer and trimmer, I was also starting to realize that I wasn't really normal digestively. I started to recognize like my nickname was like the gas man around my family and friends. And it's probably a bad thing, right? And so various things like that where I was like, man, maybe I have a problem. So I started going to the doctors. Doctors said, oh, you have IBS, eat more whole grains, take more fiber. I did this 6 or 7 times. Didn't get any answers from the doctors. They basically just said, you're different. Unfortunately, you have these bad genetics, and there's nothing you could do about it except for maybe try some drugs or eat some more whole grains. And I already tried that. It didn't work. So it really culminated where like every time I ate, I would get really bloated and burp a lot. And I had some accidents at various times. Like you said, digestive problems can be very emotional. I had public accidents and other things that really kind of can wreck with your ability to go on a date or live a normal social life, that kind of thing. And so one of my buddy, Jordan, who we started SE Lifestyle together, he had celiac disease, and he went on this diet called the specific carbohydrate diet. And the specific carbohydrate diet is a grain-free, starch-free, whole foods diet. And it really was the only thing that turned around his celiac disease when the gluten-free diet didn't do anything after 2 years, and he was literally dying. So he called me up. We went to college together, and he's like, dude, I know you're sick like I was sick. You've got to try this. And so I took him up on the offer, and literally within the first week, I went from having like gas 24 hours a day and not being able to concentrate every time I ate because of all the bloating to nothing. It was fabulous. I couldn't imagine that food had, like, just changing what I was putting in my body would give me hours of my day back.
That's amazing. Wow. Just almost overnight.
Yeah, literally almost overnight. I went from, at that point, I was working as a consultant for a Big Four accounting firm. I was very high stress. Very high stress, being in the office all hours a day. I would eat and I would just stare at my computer screen with like an Excel document open, hoping no one would ask me to do anything because I was in so much pain, and that pain was gone.
Wow. And is this a pretty, I mean, you mentioned you have like over 300 stories on your website. And the thing that I love about your website and what you're doing is this is not an easy thing to talk about. I mean, I think probably some listeners who heard the first however many minutes of this podcast, we're saying things which normally people don't talk about, like pooping and burping and farting. And again, it's not a pleasant thing to talk about, but it's an even less pleasant thing to have to live with and to deal with. So I appreciate that you're bringing these issues to the surface and that you're willing to talk about them and be transparent about them and help people with them. Because again, it's not really a sexy subject. There's not you don't see covers of magazines saying, how to 6 tips to poop better. Like, it's not something that gets the attention it deserves. So I appreciate that. And is this pretty representative of the people you work with? Like, what is life like for someone who has this challenge? And I mention that only so that some listeners might be able to empathize with what you're talking about here.
Yeah, you bring up some great points there. It's really likely that if someone isn't dealing with digestive issues, they know someone who is, because it's somewhere between 20 to 40% of people have IBS. Obviously, as you just said, having digestive talks is not sexy, so it's a very underreported type of thing. And also, just like people think that it's normal to take ibuprofen or Tylenol every day if you have a headache, a lot of people think it's normal to be constipated or to have really bad gas or diarrhea every few days. And that's not normal. Like, I really want that to be clear. It's not normal. And so the people that we work with is really a big spectrum. It's everything from my story, which is very IBS based, where at various points in my life, I just had a lot of bloating and gas and pain, to having like constipation and diarrhea, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which crosses into the inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, and other autoimmune problems. And these people are literally like chained to their toilet. Like, it's very common for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis patients to have 10 to 20 bowel movements, like sessions of diarrhea per day. And so that quality of life is awful. And the options for these people from the conventional current, medicine paradigm basically are drugs, and more drugs. And we know that the side effects of these very expensive drugs, it's really, you sacrifice your long-term health for having a life, because when you're having 20 bowel movements a day, you cannot be away from a toilet, so you don't have a quality of life. So just taking a drug that shuts off your immune system with the risk of getting cancer, osteoporosis, very fast, it's a pretty good trade-off sometimes.
Well, and Steve, I really appreciate that you said there this scoping the problem in a way. So people who go days without a bowel movement or have 20 unpleasant bowel movements a day. Because the reason I mention this is I know that when some people switch from a traditional American diet, very heavy in processed starches and sweets and unnatural fats, to a saner, more whole foods based diet full of non-starchy vegetables, nutrient dense proteins, low fructose fruits, and whole food fats, that their bowel movements do change. And in fact, the amount of fiber they're taking in is often dramatic. I mean, the average American consumes 1 serving of vegetables per day. When you have a more sane lifestyle, you're going into double-digit territory. So you are going to be taking in more fiber, so your bowel movements are going to change. Can you tell us, like, when should someone be concerned and when should someone celebrate because they're actually normal? And normal is not what everyone else is doing, because that isn't normal.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really want to talk about what you said at the beginning of the question, which is more of a statement. But you made mention that we don't see headlines like 6 simple steps to poop better. But that's coming, Jonathan. I'm telling you, it's coming in the next 20 years, because what we're learning right now through the science and through all of these people that are changing their health is that everything that you put in your mouth, you're self-selecting the bugs that grow in your gut. And those bugs are almost like another organ in how much they communicate with all of the rest of your body and how they control your health and your metabolic pathways and all these different things. And so it's really exciting. And so, yes, there is an optimal zone, if you will. And there's something called the Bristol stool chart, and anybody can Google it. It's everywhere. And this is really how I would love for everyone, just like you have sane and insane foods, I would love for people to every day think about the Bristol stool chart when they have a bowel movement, because it's very simple. It's just a scale from 1 to 7. And at 1 is basically kind of like you're constipated, and it shows little pictures, and it makes it pretty easy to understand. And the goal is to be at a 4 or a 5 on the Bristol stool chart. And the other thing is that you also want to have like easy evacuation, no straining, no pushing, no blood, and it shouldn't be too smelly. And so when you start to have stools that are a 4 or 5, and there's not a whole lot of mess, and it's not very smelly, it's very easy, that's optimal. And really that's the goal of our site, is to get everyone to optimal. And what you said is true. As soon as you change your diet, like I said, you're self-selecting what bugs are going to grow in your gut. And so there's a changeover period there where, as you switch from the standard American diet towards a more whole foods diet, it takes a little while for different microbes to grow and for you to try to kill off other ones that might have overgrown based on what you were eating before. So there definitely is an adjustment period there.
Well, and what are these steps, or what are these things that individuals can do to get to a more let's call it normal and healthy space on the Bristol stool scale?
Yeah, great question. So ideally, you want to be going to the bathroom 1 to 3 times a day, and you want the Bristol, want to be a 4 or 5 on the Bristol stool chart. And so let's say you switch to the sane food groups, and you're kind of not going as often. Maybe you're kind of constipated, which I would say is like not going to the bathroom for 3 days or longer, or you're on the lower end of the chart, which are like kind of like like rabbit pellets, if you will. And what you need to think about at that point is that you're probably maybe not eating enough fat. It just tends to be that when people eat like a really low-fat diet, they don't quite have the bowel movements that they need to have. They also could be that you have a little bit lack of bacteria, and you need to kind of help repopulate your gut. And I'm a firm believer that every day we should eat some sort of fermented food to help with probiotics from those fermented foods. And those probiotics help not only with going to the bathroom, but they help regulate our immune system and keep inflammation low and lots of other good things. So if you're kind of on the constipated side, I would look at eating. A really common mistake is to eating too low fat, so maybe some more nuts or some more oils or that type of thing. Incorporating some fermented foods, and then as after that, if things don't really change, then you kind of need to go even deeper. But if you're at the other end of the that things are kind of loose and they're not really formed, that's where you might have to think about, okay, maybe my enzymes aren't ramped up quite properly yet, and I have some pancreatic enzyme deficiency. Maybe you might want to use some digestive enzymes, some pancreatic enzymes to sort of help the transition into eating these other foods. It's also a great indicator that you actually do have a gut infection. You might need to get some more advanced testing if you've been doing the SANE food groups for, I would say like longer than 4 or 5 weeks, and you're not really seeing a reduction in those symptoms. Definitely want to get some more testing then.
Well, and the thing that I found fascinating about what you just said, I mean, it's all fascinating, but some of the things I found most fascinating were when you talked about the first set of challenges and the need for different fats and probiotics, because what I wanted to dig into here is one thing that I've found interesting and maybe underappreciated, and I'd love your take on, is what I just thought of this term. I'll try to use it more moving forward, is fibery fats. Now, here's what I mean by that. When people think of fat, they often think of, like Kentucky Fried Chicken or oil, right? That's what they think of, and whether or not that's not what they should think of. But there's other sources of fats, like let's talk about coconut, or let's talk about cocoa, and just the raw, pure forms of these foods that are incredible sources of healthy fats, incredible sources of nutrients, and shockingly, most people wouldn't think of it like this, but these are amazing sources of fiber. And what are your thoughts on, like, if you can eat these wonderful fats and these fibery fats, do you think that would be even more helpful, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would totally throw avocado in there as well.
Absolutely, yeah, avocado, definitely.
Yeah, I think here's a simple trick that I use with a lot of clients that I work with, or people that email me on my site, is that if you're constipated and you've switched to like a whole foods diet, really ramp up your coconut and your coconut oil. And just using more of those fats really seems to help people along. And it's not about, the fat doesn't actually get to the stool, but I'm not really sure about all the mechanisms yet, and I'm not really sure if anybody is, because the gut is almost like the brain. Like, we really don't understand, science doesn't understand it yet. And so we're only beginning to start to understand the interplay between the gut bacteria and the rest of the human body. But it's safe to say at this point that with more than 100 times more gut bacteria than we actually have cells in our body, that we really need to pay attention to kind of like tending our garden and making sure that what we're putting in our body is also feeding the right type and growing the right type of microbiota.
What I appreciate you blazing this new trail, because you are right that this is just an area that people are starting to understand. This is also why you don't see much talk of it in my work, because it's such an emerging field. The research is still being conducted. And just to give listeners an idea of just how big of a deal this will likely become as the science advances. And this is going to sound a little gross, but we're here to talk about science, and sometimes I can be a little gross. But one technique that the research community is experimenting with great success to heal some issues is what's called fecal transplants, where they're actually taking feces from an individual that does not have a certain condition, transplanting it into the relevant body part of an individual that does have a medical problem, and watching as that medical problem is resolved. So it's almost like, that's just, I'm not sure any of us want to sign up for that tomorrow, but that's wow. I mean, Steve, what do you say about that?
Oh, it's fascinating because, number one, you're talking about the people who are doing this, because as you said, when you first hear about this term fecal transplant, you're like, oh, holy gross, right? But the people who are seeing this success are people with like resistant Colostrum difficile infections. These are infections that you will die. Like, we don't have enough antibiotics. We don't know how to deal with them. Anybody can go into the hospital, have a simple procedure done, and catch C. diff. It happens all the time. It happens every day in the United States. And if it doesn't respond with the first round of infections, they start to run out of ways to treat these people, and death is a very likely outcome. And so they can completely eradicate it with just a simple procedure of swapping out a healthy person's gut microbiota, colon microbiota, into this very sick person's, and they're literally symptom free. It's quite amazing. And actually, If you haven't seen it, Jonathan, there's actually some new research where they take some slim people's gut bugs, they put it into obese people. The obese people lose weight. And then if you put the obese people's gut bugs into slim people, they'll gain weight.
That's so fascinating. It reminds me, so much of my work is predicated on hormonal balance. And there's very similar studies done in rats with hormones where they will combine two rats together they create a Franken rat. And again, it's not the most pleasant image to think of. The reason they do this is they'll take, for example, a morbidly obese rat and stitch it together with a slim rat, and the hormones then cross what's called the parabiotic union, or their blood. They have one source of blood, and the obese rat will start to just lose weight because the hormones, which are in the lean rat, will then trigger fat loss processes in the obese rat. And it sounds like something similar is happening here with the gut, and that is, wow. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, and there's plenty of rat studies that do that same fecal transplant with the fat mice and the skinny mice. And I think there are obviously kind of some Franken mice as well, so we have to take that with a little grain of salt. But, I mean, I think, like you said, the research is very new. The fecal transplants are super new. They're sort of an alternative thing where it's kind of off the FDA's radar right now, and it costs a lot of money out of your own pocket to save your life at this point if you want to go that route. But what is true is that it's working, and that, again, every bite of food you put in your mouth, you're sort of self-selecting what is going to grow in your body. And every time you choose to use antibiotics, you're also deciding to, kind of carpet bomb everything that's growing inside of you. And what we're learning is that these bugs really play into, your immune system and how your skin looks and how you age and all these different things. So it's very important.
And one thing I want to urge listeners to take away from this is not like this one person, you could hear this and you could think to yourself, oh, Jesus, just another thing to think about. Oh my God, now I'm going to think I have gut biota and oh my God. But what I think we're saying here, which is so encouraging, is if you look at Steve's website and his resources, is that just eating things you find in nature, eating water, fiber, and protein packed foods, in some ways, this is just manifesting yet another example of the benefits and glory of just taking that simple approach. Like you can count calories till you're blue in the face. It's not going to help these gut issues we're talking about at all. Like if what you're eating is causing you to have gut problems and you just eat less of it, well, you're just starving yourself, and you may have slightly less gut problems because you have slightly less of it to cause problems. But as soon as you stop, you're right back to where you started. And then if you keep taking antibiotics to deal with the problem rather than just eating the foods that would avoid the problem in the first place, life gets so much simpler if you just eat those sane, natural, and delicious foods. And this is yet another example of that, which, again, just makes me happy rather than feel overwhelmed or that there's, oh my God, another thing to worry about. What do you think, Steve?
Oh, I think you're spot on. I mean, I definitely don't want any listeners to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, or this, like you said, just add this to the pile of things I need to learn about. The only person who needs to really learn about this is one of those people who are just digestively not doing well. If you're having a lot of pain, if you're someone who's on the far ends of the Bristol stool chart, then that's somebody who's going to want to dig deeper, maybe come over to my site and do some looking around. But like you said, the diet that we use on our site is called the specific carbohydrate diet. And the only change really from what you're telling people to do is that we remove starch for a little while. Because it feeds a certain class of bacteria that for those who have really bad digestive problems, normally they have an overgrowth of that bacteria. But we then add that starch back in later. And so we are advocating the exact same foods. It doesn't have to be more complex than that. And if you switch over to eating sane foods and you're digestively doing great, then there's really nothing else for you to worry about. And I would say the only big take-home point, if you want to boil it all down, is that we rarely have, in the human body, it's such a complex mathematical system, right? So I'm an electrical engineer by the first amount of training I've had, and I've had some functional medicine training since then, but I always come back to math, right? So the inputs are all the things that you talk about, whether it's food and healthy water and air and exercise and that. We don't really have that many outputs that we can measure or track. And it just turns out that poop is one of those. So if you just kind of keep an eye on it and you know that you're kind of trending in, the good range of the Bristol stool chart, then that's really all you have to take home.
I love it. And Steve, one last question I have for you is, you mentioned earlier probiotics, and we hear a lot about probiotic supplements, and we also hear about probiotics being found in dairy. But we also, especially if people are plugged into the internet nutrition community, there's some mixed messages about dairy, about things like should you eat dairy, should you not eat dairy? My take is that things like high probiotic, low sugar dairy foods such as cottage cheese and Greek yogurt are good options. What do you think?
I think it's really an individual question. I think that you can get probiotics from all kinds of sources. You could get it from a pill. You could get it from fermented dairy. You could get it from sauerkraut and kimchi and natto and all these other fermented foods. So what I say and what we kind of teach, one of the core principles of our ebook and our way of having everyone create their own custom real food diet is using the science of the immune system to test for if you have a leaky gut and if you're going to produce reactions towards foods. And what we do is we have a rule of 4 days. And that's basically what the scientific literature is going to tell us. If you eat a food and you react to that food it can happen anywhere in between the 0 to 4 day mark, then you know that you kind of have a leaky gut or you have some sort of immune system build up to that food and you should probably avoid it. So what I would say to all your listeners who are curious about this question, whether or not they should be eating dairy and whether or not they should be getting their probiotics from dairy, is use the 4 day rule. It's very simple. For 4 days, don't change anything, kind of eat the same foods you always eat, and then just eat some dairy each day for 4 days. Maybe a cup or two of cottage cheese or yogurt, whatever your favorite thing is for those 4 days, and then stop. And at the end of those 4 days, give yourself 4 to 7 days, wait, and then do it again. And what you'll see is you'll either notice a difference or you won't. You can also do a washout period ahead of time, 4 to 7 days, no dairy, then try dairy for 4 days. If you notice postnasal drip, if your stools get different or you notice any other brain fog, that types of things, those are the people that might want to consider sauerkraut or probiotic pills.
Fascinating. Well, where can people, if they do want to dig into this and learn more, where should they go? What should be their 3 takeaway steps to learn more about what you're doing?
First step is definitely come over to scdlifestyle.com. We have a free quick start guide that you could download right there if you were curious about the specific carbohydrate diet, or just spend some time on the site there. We have a podcast and we have like a TV show where we're just trying to spread awareness about different digestive diseases, different digestive conditions, the symptoms, and what are some simple strategies, whether it be testing or different foods or supplements that can really help those various conditions. So I would say I hope they can just spend some time on the site.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate all that you're doing. I think I tip my hat to you for dealing with a subject that is not one that's talked about much and one that needs to be talked about more. I'm thinking to myself of a story I heard where one of my friends from college ended up doing quite well for himself in the urinal cake business. And everyone was just like, what the heck? And they asked him, why did you go in the urinal cake business? He's like, well, nobody wants to go in the urinal cake business. So it was actually surprisingly easy to do quite well there, because it's not, what do? Well, I make urinal cakes. It's not, and it's the same thing with what you guys are doing, right? It's not necessarily the sexiest thing, but it's something that's really, really important. So my hat's off to you for that. And I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate you letting me come on the show and talk about poop. And it might not be the most sexiest subject, but it is one I think that's really growing in the scientific literature as far as something that people should pay attention to. And the reality is when you're someone like myself and you struggled with those sleepless nights and those public problems and that kind of thing, and when you overcome that and you kind of are over that, you know the emotional pain and the body pain that goes along with that. And I just can't shut myself up. So, apparently people are listening, so that's a good thing. So we'll just keep trying to talk more about poop, and I think we'll help more people.
I love it. Well, what I see you doing is really freeing people. We live in a country, we live in a world that just values individual freedom so highly. And what I see you as doing is freeing people from something which is otherwise really, really trapping them in a way that is just no person should have to deal with. So kudos to you, sir, and thank you again.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for all the work that you've done, and I appreciate you letting me come on the show.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks so much, Steve, and thank you everyone for listening. Until next time, remember to eat more and exercise less, but do that smarter. Talk to you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.